Hey everyone, Tactics here with my second last Mythic Vault of the Incarnates boss guide, where I'll be covering the penultimate boss of the raid, Broodkeeper Diurna. In this video, I'll touch on how we split our group up in the first phase between the boss and adds, our egg break rotation general fight strategy for both of the phases, and then just some other tips and tricks that will hopefully help you and your guild get this boss down. To start though, let's actually quickly talk about a nerf that is hitting this boss this week, which I think is pretty significant here, so just slamming it in here. The Stone Slam Detonation, which is the mythic mechanic Soak from the tank ability in the second phase, has been nerfed by 62.5% here, down to just 480k from almost 1.3 million, and this is a pretty massive nerf to this ability, of course, which now opens you up to playing literally every tank combination for this boss fight without it making it significantly more difficult for your group to kill it. Beforehand, of course, Blood DKs were able to immune this, and that was very relevant because of how big the tank soak was, but now with it being as small as it is, it's very, very easy for you to just kind of have your two tanks soak every single hit together, and no one else really needs to be in it. Maybe you can dip some immunes into it later on in the fight, but really, it just in general is just way easier for you to deal with. You don't need that Blood DK immune. Even prop paladins, I think brewmasters as well, were able to kind of immune or solo soak as well, so much less punishing to some of those other tank specs to actually tank this fight. I'll talk a bit more about this when we actually get to phase 2 in this guide, but I just wanted to mention that right off the bat here. Any tank combo, perfectly fine now to kill this boss. With that said, now let's talk about some of the strategies for P1, and there's two main ones that I've seen, either the long P1 or the short P1 strat. So for the long P1 strat, if you just look at kind of egg clears here, basically what you do is you do 12 different egg breaks in this phase, which pushes you into phase 2 just after the second spawn of adds from the 5th ad set, which gives you a little bit more time in this first phase to let you get the boss health lower. It also makes P1 a little bit less dangerous because you're doing less triple egg breaks and you have a couple more double egg breaks in there. The negative of this strategy is, of course, that means that you do spawn that last ad set, which I mentioned, which happens to be a double Proto Drake ad set right before you transition into phase 2, which is an exceptionally dangerous point in the fight there and takes some time to learn. In my opinion, you have to commit a lot of raid cooldowns to it, and you lose a bunch of damage from the boss there because you have to put that into the drakes, which you could instead be putting, of course, into that boss. So because of that, I actually am a fan of the strat that we used on our kill here that I'm going to show, which is the short P1 strat. In this, you do 11 sets instead of 12, which means you do need to do a couple more triple egg sets here, which causes you to transition into that second phase a little bit earlier, just after the first set of adds from that 5th spawn, but that lets you skip those proto drakes, so you don't have those massive HP dangerous raid damage mobs, but of course that means you have less boss damage time in this first phase, and of course you will get one extra of those tank soaks in the second phase, but with that massive nerf, that's also much less of a downside as well. You will be dealing with a couple of flame benders on the boss with this short strat, so that's just something you'll need to keep on top of when it comes to purges and avoiding those flame beams, the flame sentry beams that come out, but I think overall it is the better strategy. So for that short strat that we mentioned, of course, that we did use on our kill, this is the egg breaks that we used. Here is important for a couple of reasons. One, it ensures that the boss is never too close to any of the ad spawns when they come out, and two, it does actually ensure that you don't have any of the mythic storm fissure swirlies spawn in the center of the room. Basically, how that storm fissure mechanic works is that occasionally it'll cause puddles to appear throughout the room based on where you path the lightning staff activatable extraction button in this first phase. When you pad that beam through to kill the eggs, it'll spawn swirlies on the ground when the boss casts storm fissures, basically. But it does have a limit to the amount of puddles that it can spawn, so that's the key. By doing the outside of the room first here, you can reach the limit of those swirlies, which will free up the whole center of this room for your raid to spread in during P2. Another thing you can do is you can have extra players activate the staff, usually around the 1st or the 5th set of egg breaks here, just to cause some more swirlies to appear to give you even more space to kind of take up more of that memory. In terms of who we had breaking the eggs, you can see the labels here. We used our tank, which in this case was a Blood DK because this is a pre-nerf kill. We also had our healer in the Holy Paladin, and then we had an extremely mobile DPS here, which in our case was a BM Hunter. Only having one DPS do this was pretty important, I think, to help us meet that very, very tight boss damage check, because for many other specs, doing the heavy movement involved with breaking eggs is going to be a pretty significant DPS loss, and BM Hunter is kind of an exception to that rule, which is why we had one assigned to break eggs here, and then a healer and a tank breaking the others. Know that because of how we want to break the eggs and like the positioning of these breaks, to pull the boss, you will want to wait until she is kind of on this half of the room here, just because you're going to lose a pretty significant amount of damage in your opener if like you're pulling the boss over by like 6, 7, 5-ish, and dragging her all the way over to 1. So some slight restrictions on the pull timing there, but just keep that in mind. You will want to wait there. In terms of where the ad spawns relative to these egg breaks, each ad set has 2 spawns of ads that are staggered by a few seconds. The first set is a little different because it actually has 3 spawns, 2 of which happen first, and then there's the third that is staggered slightly. The first spawns come from triangle and X. The third comes from diamond, so all over here, which is why you start on the left side of the room. From there, you'll move across to the square and circle, where the first is at square, second is at circle. Then it's the third set has the first at X, the second at star. Fourth set has the first at circle and the second at star. And then the fifth and final set has the triangle spawn as first, and then you push the boss before the set of double proto drakes spawns over at the square marker. Now let's talk about the actual split that we did for our groups, because it wasn't directly in half. We ended up going with a 12-8 split between the ads and boss respectively. For the boss team, we had people spec'd into pure single target, essentially. Any spec that had to kind of choose between doing AoE and single target, it was just really good to have them go single target here, to not have to make that choice and just stay on the boss. On our kill, we had our DPS DK, Shadow Priest, Assassination Rogue, Arcane Mage, and of course that BM Hunter doing eggs, DPSing the boss here, alongside the 2 healers, which in our case was a Resto Druid and a Holy Paladin, also doing the eggs with our tank. Again, was a Blood DK on our kill. Though before we actually did the kill, we did a significant amount of progress with a Vengeance Demon Hunter, which was able to get through this first phase just fine, in case you're wondering. So you don't have to be a Blood DK to tank the boss here in P1. As I mentioned, that was for a P2 cheese on the tank mechanic, which is now very, very nerfed, so the Blood DK no longer required for sure. For the ad groups, we had more of the cleave-based specs and specs that didn't really have to give up too much single target in order to do AoE, because the boss damage check, as I've mentioned, is still quite tight, so having good P2 boss damage is very, very important. On top of this, priority damage is also pretty good in the ad group anyways, to kill some of the more bigger health mobs, as a lot of the AoE kind of just dies very quickly to passive cleave, and you're left with like 2 or 3 very high health mobs, which kind of just need to be cleaved down or even priority down as well. Initially, during progression, we did kind of hard split these teams up after the initial kind of boss hit on pull. As we got more consistent though, getting into P2, we started to peel back on the ad team damage a little bit, just to try and squeeze out more boss damage in P1, because again, you want to get that boss as low as possible going into P2, and our goal was always to be sub 60% boss HP, transitioning into P1 or P2 rather, with the short P1 strat. In terms of what we did to achieve that, we did things like keep one of our DPSers off of the first set of ads, instead stayed on the boss for the entire like cooldown window there, then joined us for the second set of ads. For us, we had our Devastation Evoker do that. We also moved some CDs around off of that first set of ads and onto the boss with Bloodlust pots as well, that kind of thing. On top of this, every time an ad set had just like that 2 or 3 big mobs left in it, we had our Boomkin kind of peel off and do a bit of extra like refresh dots, maybe throw a few star surges into the boss, that kind of thing, which can actually give you a ton of extra boss damage if you're doing that after every set, especially if you do have multiple Boomkins in your group. Overall, all of those small optimizations together ended up adding like 8 to 10% extra boss damage off of the boss in this short P1 strategy, which put that boss below 60%, which is a more killable range for us in P2. Now, I've talked a bunch, let's actually look into some footage here. So I've got a Resto Druid POV here for the actual boss team, because of course I was not on the boss team, I was the ad team tank. Shout out to Tree Guy, I think Tree Guy TV on Twitch if you want to check out Resto Druid POV. But basically here, moving forward, so on pull, as I mentioned, everyone here is on the boss. as I mentioned. We're doing Lust, we're popping all of our CDs, healers are even DPSing, as you can tell, there's not much damage going out, we're just nuking the boss. The ad team's going to leave at some point, and then the first staff comes out, and we're starting to rotate around the room now. The hardest part here for the boss team is going to be living some of these scarier mechanic overlaps, and this usually involves doing a triple egg break, coming in close proximity to either the Icy Shroud, which is that healing, absorb, and slow, or the wildfires you can see here, which is those fire swirlies, which also has smaller fire swirlies attached to it on Mythic, which you do want to make sure that you are avoiding. Another big thing to remember here for the boss team in the first phase, also in the second phase as well for everyone, is that anything you can do to prevent loss of movement, you can use to completely mitigate that healing absorb from the Icy Shroud debuff. So Freedom, Druid Shapeshifter, you're going to see him do a fair bit here. Avatar for Warriors, plenty of other abilities I'm not mentioning. I think Hunters, Warlocks can also clear it as well. It's very, very, very valuable. You clear that entire healing absorb on top of the slow in phase 1 and the root in phase 2, and also like it's a magic debuff as well, so Mass Dispel is also very, very powerful against it as well. So that can get anyone who can't kind of clear themselves if you clear yourself ASAP. So keep that in mind. Very, very good to keep yourself alive, because you're not only getting rid of that movement, the movement slow or root, but you're also getting rid of that massive healing absorb on you. Now for this, we found the most dangerous overlaps here in this first phase for the boss team to be around Great Staffs 3, 5, 7, and 10. So that is kind of where you want to make sure you're applying either raid cooldowns like Rally or Aura Mastery or Personals as well, because of course you don't really have enough raid cooldowns usually to cover all that and some of the other problems in the fight as well. For the egg team here, something to note around the staff positioning here, I'm just going to rewind a second so you can see it, is that the staff will always spawn on the boss's right hand, So you can actually kind of use that and position the boss accordingly so that the staff is kind of between the 2 or 3 eggs that you want to kill, and then the actual positioning of the egg breaking members need to be relatively close to that so they can instantly use the extra action button to click the laser and then run and kite that beam towards the egg that they need to break, because some of these sets are quite far from where the boss is. So you can see here coming out in a second, you're going to have the Great Staff on the boss's right arm. You see it literally comes from the right hand, instantly clicked by our egg breakers, and they're kiting. As you can see here, the Hunter had a pretty far spawn, but he still got it relatively quickly. He had about an extra 2 seconds there to get it. And there's those lightning swirlies. As I mentioned early on, you are going to get spawns of these whenever that ability goes off, but later on you're going to see that the middle of the room is completely clear. And yeah, the biggest thing I do want to note is that the team here on the boss is going to be constantly hammered with damage, because the Wildfire and the Icy Shroud do not hit the ad team for the most part. You might occasionally have like 1 or 2 range DPS that are kind of a little bit too close to the boss, get ticked by those abilities, but otherwise they're not getting hit by those abilities, and they're not getting the stacking damage taken increase here from the boss abilities also. So the later you get in this phase, the more dangerous it becomes for all of these boss team members. Now let's talk a little bit about the ad team here in the first phase. So again, this is now my POV here. Fast forwarding a little bit, let's actually fast forward to before the first ad set. So basically here, we're doing our damage on pull, then we all gate away, pick up our ads. MDs are absolutely huge for the ad team here. We had 1 to play with here with our rogue. That was enough. I think ideally, if you have 2, that would be fantastic. But of course, don't forget, you do want to make sure that you have kind of a BM Hunter or some other very, very mobile DPS spec on the boss side, so sometimes it's not feasible to have 2 MDs. So we did 1, so I went over, grabbed these 2, while my misdirect went over to the other set here and misdirected those guys over, leap over, group them in the middle, because we know that the 3rd set of ads from this first ad spawn is going to be spawning right here behind us on that diamond marker. In terms of interrupts here, just throw spare interrupts into the mage's ice barrage to group them up initially. In this pack, there's no additional kicks, but I'll get to that in a second in the next ad pack. But here you have these Earth Reavers as your big mobs, and these guys have a pretty annoying frontal type attack coming out in the Tremors ability, and I'll show it to you when it's a little more clear after the smaller ads die. So basically how these Tremors work, as you can see those little swirlies going out, basically it's a frontal cone attack, but when this Tremor cast finishes, it's not people hit by this cone that is actually going to be stunned. It's people hit by the swirlies that kind of shoot out in a staggered fashion after that cast goes off. So this is actually a little misleading in terms of the hitbox of the ability. It will actually hit kind of, if you're within the Earth Reaver's hitbox at all, and you're not even in this cone, you can still be hit by the tremors, because the tremors themselves have their own circle hitbox. You're going to see the tremor goes off, you're going to see the circles coming out there, and they don't all come out at once. So if you wait for this tremor to go out, and then I instantly move back, for example, there's a tremor still right there, right? So if I moved back, I would still be stunned by that tremor, even though the cone is already gone. So keep in mind, it's a little annoying. It's a little hard to get used to initially. It's a little weird in terms of the hitbox, not totally what it seems like it's going to be. So melee DPS, make sure you're off of the mobs a little bit. Tank, make sure that you are kind of sidestepping in a staggered fashion. You don't instantly go back to your old spot when you're going back and forth, because of course you'll have 3 Earth Reavers here, 1 from the first spawn, 2 from the second, so they're going to be a little staggered in their casts of that tremor ability. So you basically are just kind of bouncing back and forth between the cones along this wall, not pointing it towards others here. So as you see, we're done with this pack here. We're going to move towards our second pack. I'm going to walk in and rally with everyone. You see a few people going in here. This wildfire does go out. We are close enough to be hit by this wildfire because we're walking in. We apply some dots to this boss for some extra boss damage, and then we go to our second spawn of ads. This is also where our evoker is now joining us, our DPS evoker, and so we're killing here this dragon, and we're dragging it over to the second spawn where another frost proto-dragon is going to spawn, and this is kind of the scariest pull for your tank on this side because of these bleeds right here. A very, very useful thing to have is any evoker in your group here. We only had a single one, but that is enough because we got a bleed cleanse and it can clear all the bleeds on you. So the scariest part is if both frost dragons actually hit you with the bleed, because sometimes you can like parry it or dodge it or something like that, and that doesn't apply the bleed. But if you have 2 stacks of the bleed on you, you can get that bleed cleanse to immediately clear both. Very, very useful if your tank is having problems living with that bleed. But as you can see here, we're dragging. We want to avoid those lightning puddles, so we drag the mobs right here. So this pack will just run right at us, and we're able to AoE it all down. Meanwhile, there's really just one big guy here, right, in the Frost Proto-Dragon. So again, that's kind of showing where that single target in the ad group even is still very, very relevant. You want to nuke down that Proto-Dragon because, yes, it has the scary bleed, but it's also doing that pulsing party damage to everyone in the ad group as well. And this is kind of the scary set for the ad group. When you have the triple egg breaks with a dragon, or even 2 dragons in this case alive, that's kind of where you're a little bit worried, okay, that's where maybe I need to pop a personal over here to just live that overlap. So that's a case where I actually parried or dodged that other proto-dragon. As you can see here, aggro is a little rough. I just finally got that last mage. We had, again, the misdirect here on the second spawn of ads. The first spawn, I just had a couple cooldowns for to get aggro. I moved it over, and then we misdirected the second set of ads here. So that's what happens when you only have 1 misdirect or tricks in your ad group. You kind of have to pick and choose, okay, which one am I going to need help actually getting aggro for? Usually it was the second ad spawns, unless they had AoE taunt. So I'll kind of point that out for you as well, how we handled aggro, because that can also be a little of a problem. But here we do have a kick order on the Stormbringer ads. We have 2 kicks assigned to each to kick their cast, and we did use the weak aura for that as well, and that will stun the tank if it goes off, so be aware of that. The ionizing charge also will prioritize range, as you can see here, so range just wants to be a little spread so they don't cleave that. Note that that ability can be spell reflected if you miss a kick, so there is that. And once there's only the 2 big guys left in this pull, we are focusing the Proto Dragon here as I move across the platform to our ad spawn over there at the X marker. So I'm going to pick up these ads and I'm going to watch this lightning. That's why I'm pulling this far away. I want the melee to be able to stand here without getting hit by the lightning, be able to cleave these mobs, and still have tremors pointing away. So now I've built enough aggro on this pack. I move to the second spawn over in this corner. And again, this is where the tricks is going out. This is where... See, aggro is still tough even with the tricks. A bit weird here. The mobs kind of turned around. We had a kick go off. That's what happens if a kick goes off. But we're able to recover. Luckily, these Legionnaires are the small ads. I run into the lightning to try and pick them up. But as I can see, like, aggro is like pretty tough on some of these packs. So definitely having at least 1 MD is for sure very, very important. And I would say if you had 2 in your ad group, that would be ideal, because then you have one person always MDing the first spawn of ads, one person always MDing the second spawn of ads, and that will just make your tank's life and everyone else's life way easier for this ad group. But you can get by with 1 or even 0 MDs if you really have to. That's the power of misdirect. And I think that was, oh, actually, you know, I actually missed one of the ads in the first set here. I'm going to talk about them in the last set, but I will go over them because they do exist in the first set, so it is good to talk about. The Flame Bender, as you can see there. Okay, so this Flame Bender, not here, it's going to be in the first set on the other side, is very important. Usually your focus target, the Flame Sentry, targets ranged, as you can see there. Spins around, deals a pretty decent amount of damage. Cauterizing Flame is a big hit on itself and other mobs as well. And it puts a heal on them though. So if the heal gets a couple ticks off, it basically cancels out the damage of Cauterizing Flame. So you really want to kind of rotate purges. So we had like a Mass Dispel and Arcane Torrents, and then individual purges from the Shamans here to kind of fill that out whenever those were down or not available. So those are really important there. AoE, especially having an Arcane Torrent and a Mass Dispel in this group, was very powerful. If you have like a couple Arcane Torrents, that could do the job as well, just to clear that buff off of all of them ASAP so that they don't get too much healing off. Because if you let too much healing go off, like, these packs will just live forever. So very important you're getting those purges almost like the instant that cast goes off, just so there's no extra healing going out in these packs. And that's also very relevant for the last ad set that has 2 of those guys in it. Moving back though to the 4th ad set, I believe is where we were at. Yeah, we did this 3rd ad set. The next ad set is going to be between orange first, yellow second. So there it is. We're going to go grab that ad set. This one has a single Proto Drake in it. So again, be aware of the triple breaks with the Proto Dragon pulsing damage. It also has a kick in it as well. I believe a second kick spawns from the next ad. Maybe not. I'll move over, basically just backing it up. That pack was misdirected to me. And then I'm going to use AoE Taunt on this pack here. Yeah, there it is. 2 Stormbringers. So make sure you have kicks assigned in this group on top of that. Again, we use that just general kick weak aura for this boss to assign 2 kicks to each skull and X marker. And you can call backups here as needed. Nuking that Proto Dragon down first out of all these big mobs, it dies, and then you can kind of cleave here for safety. And we have a ton of time here, and basically how we handle this 5th and final set, because we are doing the fast transition in this phase, what we do is as soon as these ads are dead, everyone goes and hits the boss. This is how also we get a little bit of extra boss damage in here. So we're hitting the boss here. The ads are spawning in about 6 seconds. I'm hitting the ads, or the boss rather, and then I'm basically going alone over to the ads here. Pop rally on that last transition too. I'm waiting out here specifically for this Flame Sentry cast. So I think these range are actually a little bit too close, because you can actually bait these Flame Sentries way off in this corner here if everyone else is out of range. So that's one thing to note, why the tank would go over here alone and you wouldn't bring a couple other ranged over to this area. So these Flame Sentries are just going to spawn on them, I believe. Yeah. So if no one was here, these Flame Sentries would all spawn near me. As you can see, this one did, but the other 2 didn't. So that's why you want to be alone here as the tank. You can bait that first Flame Sentries away from everyone else. But anyways, from here, I am running into the boss. A little dangerous if you don't have like a big leap or something available to you. Be careful with all this lightning here. Running in with a Wildfire, I am taunting the boss because with our tank order, I'm taking the first Stoneclaw hit for this strategy. That was specifically because we were AMSing certain more dangerous overlaps. But again, with that nerf to this debuff in P2, you could totally just have your first, like your boss tank, take this first Stoneclaw, because you don't need to do the weird AMS stuff for specific overlaps. So don't worry about that. You wouldn't need to like rush as hard as I was. But basically here, the number one thing to be on top of here is your purges. Like I mentioned, these Legionnaires are going to die ASAP. They don't really matter, but you really want to make sure you have a person assigned to each Flame Bender to instantly purge them when the heals go out, and potentially spam purge them if you because they will get 2 stacks, right? Because there's 2 Flame Benders, they both cast around the same time. It's going to put 2 stacks on them, so you want to make sure you get both off of them ASAP, because you don't want them spawning too many Flame Sentries in this area. As you see, those 2 are behind us, they wouldn't be there. There's that first Flame Sentry cast. This one is fine, but I believe you'd really want to kill them by the second cast. See there, they're getting a couple ticks of the healing there from the heals, so they are going to live probably longer than we wanted them. So we'd want them to be dead usually shortly after or shortly before that Flame Sentry cast, but they are getting a bit more healing than we intended. So it can be a little bit chaotic on the transition. But trust me when I say the transition with the Proto-Drakes is definitely significantly more chaotic because they are absolutely nuking your tank. They're both pulsing for frost damage and all this wildfire stuff is going out. So this is just a little bit more area denial while these are up. So you can definitely pump a little bit more damage and focus a little bit more on the purges when these guys are up. And that would have helped us kill these out. They probably would have already been dead. Basically, if we had been a bit more on top of them, but that's okay. We still were able to cleave them down. As you can actually probably see on the transition here, you can see the Storm Surge pattern where it is, these puddles. Nothing in the center of the room here, which is why we did that kind of egg pattern in the first phase. All the center of the room is clear for people to kind of spread out in and be relatively safe in. And we can talk about the brand new tank mythic mechanic in this phase, the Mortal Stone Slam, which I mentioned was previously nerfed. On top of the now 90% healing reduction for 12 seconds that it puts on the tank, there's a pretty nasty 6-second dot on the tank as well as that big explosion, which is now 480k damage over at the end, which is split between everyone in it. For this first one, right off the bat, we just had all melee kind of soak it. Something you could still do, and it would be just much, much safer. And potentially also could be the strat, is you just have all your melee soak it every time to have it do like almost no damage. But it's probably not a big deal to just have your 2 tanks soak it every time now post nerf. Some things to note about that ability though is that the boss is going to be gaining Broodkeeper's Fury stacks over there. As you can see, it's 15% increased damage on those hits per stack. So as this fight kind of goes on, that is going to be hitting harder and harder. So later on in the fight, it may be worthwhile to kind of throw in maybe like a rogue who's cloaking or even fainting or any other kind of immunity into that soak as well, just to reduce the damage by another person. But it's probably not going to be super likely. You'll need that at least for the beginning part of this phase. It is important though for the tank actually being targeted by the actual Stone Slam itself to use their personal or have their external applied to them before that initial Mortal Stone Slam hit, because when it does actually apply, it has that massive healing reduction, so you've already missed mitigating that first initial big hit. You can't really be topped back up. You're taking the ticking dot immediately after, and then you're exploding. So that's all very, very dangerous time. And if you don't mitigate that initial hit, you're down to 50% health. There's a pretty low chance that you're living from there if you're just starting to mitigate there, because the healing at that point is only 10% effective, right? So you want to really make sure you're mitigating that initial hit along with the dot and the impact hit all together, not just the dot of the impact hit, or not just the impact hit alone, which sometimes I've seen as well. So have that mitigation out relatively early when that Stone Slam cast begins. Now there are some pretty scary overlaps here, which I will talk about in a second, but I do want to highlight our positioning really quickly. We did have a kind of assigned spots in melee, which made it a little easier to kind of handle the wildfire in this phase. So basically 2 tanks here facing the boss this way. This was our breakdown of the positioning. Rogues were here because pretty often rogues were either fainting or cloaking to soak with the tanks, which is why the rogues were the closest to the tanks. But again, like I mentioned, that's probably not necessary. Otherwise, the melee are just kind of spread out along the side of the boss here. This makes it very easy for wildfire positioning. For wildfire, melee would kind of drop their first puddle here. They'd back up, drop their second puddle there, and then they'd step forward again once their first puddle disappeared. Just with this close proximity to everyone, just watch again those little mythic puddles that spawn as well when the wildfire comes out will give you extra stacks, so be careful of those. Also, if you get the lightning staff, the great staff actually fixating one of your melee, you're pretty much just running directly out. If this lightning staff is here, run directly straight back. Don't strafe it through the rest of your melee. You just run straight back. Get that lightning staff in a straight in a straight line, and then you can run back when it's over. So it makes that very, very easy. Made this phase a little bit more consistent just in terms of melee positioning. And then we had range kind of just spread out along the boss here. We even had a couple range, I think, behind us as well, so keep that in mind. Going back to the video itself now, though, there are a few kind of scarier overlaps. Note here, the Frozen Shroud in this phase now does have that full root attached to it, and that's kind of when the scary overlaps usually happen. It's when that Frozen Shroud overlaps with either the Wildfire or the Great Staff Lightning, because of course if you get frozen during this lightning fixate and you don't break that root ASAP, you are really scared to get run over by that lightning, which is pretty much a one-shot on this difficulty. So be aware of that. That's another scary overlap right there. You see the Wildfire. The second one immediately ended, and then we were rooted right out of it. So if you don't move instantly out of your previous Wildfire, you're going to get rooted in a Wildfire, gain a bunch more stacks, take a bunch of extra damage. So those are the scary overlaps of this phase. And of course, just as the phase goes on with that 15% stacking damage buff the boss gets, just every ability becomes scarier and scarier. So a big thing for us, the scary overlaps. Wildfire 14 has the Frozen Shroud right after the Wildfire, which you just saw. Wildfire 16 coming up here in 15 seconds, as you can see, is going to have this Ice Shroud just before the Wildfire. So you're going to see it come out. We want to break it ASAP. Come out right after the Storm Fissure. So the Storm Fissures come out. There's the Swirlies. Frozen Shroud, everyone's rooted. Wildfire comes out, and you see how quickly we broke those Frozen Shrouds. So again, any movement ability, Avatar, Freedom, Tiger's Lust, I don't remember the names of the Warlock and the Hunter ones, those kind of things. Anything like that will break it. Mass Dispels and individual magic dispels will break it as well. And in a pinch, you can DPS them down as well in this phase. So all those things are used to break those healing absorbs and roots ASAP here. The Wildfire came out right after. The other overlap is Wildfire 21, I believe, where again, the Frozen Shroud comes out right after the Wildfire. And then for the Great Staff, it's actually this Great Staff. So Great Staff 17 here, so coming out in just a few seconds. You'll see it's the Great Staff comes out, starts fixating people, and those people need to get away ASAP because they are going to be rooted shortly after that. So in 8 seconds here, we'll see it. And of course, you have that Wildfire first, and this is a pretty long-lasting dot, right? If you end up accidentally refreshing your Wildfire a little bit into this phase, see, it's 14 seconds, and the next Wildfire comes in 19 seconds. So if you refresh it a couple times by accident, for example, you're just going to keep chaining up this dot by the next Wildfire cast, which is exceptionally dangerous and something you want to avoid for sure. Let's keep that in mind. So here's that overlap. The staff goes out. You can see melee running straight back, running. Lightning goes out, or the Frozen Shroud goes out, and they get cleared instantly, and dodging between it there, dodging away over there. So very important, specifically also, if those players don't have a way to break the Frozen Shroud, the healers are looking and individually dispelling those players because they're going to be away from the pack, right? They're going to not be hit by the mass dispels, by the melee cleaving, right? That's why melee kind of breaks very quickly. We throw a mass dispel in the big clump, we're cleaving. Anyone who has the ability to break it themselves breaks it themselves. That's why melee clears so fast. But that one in particular, if melee get that staff, they're out of the clump, right? So they need some help there. So keep that in mind. But yeah, from there, it's just kind of a big DPS race until you kind of get overwhelmed by the stacking damage on this boss. But there we have it, guys. My full Mythic Broodkeeper guide. Hopefully this helps you and your guild get this boss down. And if it did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more content like it. We're currently working on Razageth and getting her down. So once we do, that guide will be out as well. So keep an eye out on that one. I do want to give a big shout out to Gorebreaker and all of my supporters over on Patreon. I appreciate every single one of you. And if you want to support me over there, I'll link that down in the description below. Otherwise, thanks everyone so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.